Welcome back to On the Move with Victor Shi. It is Wednesday, July 5th. My friend Soledad O'Brien says it best when she says our media is failing us. Just over the weekend, ABC posted a tweet describing a far-right fascistic organization called Moms for Liberty, a group of joyful warriors. We also remember CNN platforming Donald Trump during a town hall with a majority Republican audience who applauded him and offered minimal pushback. And of course, there was that infamous interview between Leslie Stahl and Marjorie Taylor Green, which was problematic to say the least. On top of that, they aren't focusing on the issues and the people that all of us want to hear more about. So, how do we change that? Will it ever change? I'm lucky to be joined by Reecie Colbert, who hosts the Reecie Colbert Show on Sirius XM Radio and is the author of The Long and Short of It Guide to the 2022 Midterms Political Book Series. And I was today years old when I also found out that Reecie graduated from UCLA, where I currently go to school. Reecie, it is so great to see you. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you for having me, Victor. So good to see you again. Not on the show, but
Yes,
again in another panel that we did together.
of course. No, I'm so looking forward to this. And I have to start off by asking you about this kind of continued pattern by our media by basically kind of giving extreme far right kind of Republican groups and people platforms. And as someone who is kind of in this media space and studies it closely, why does this still happen?
I think that the mainstream media feels incredibly uncomfortable with calling the radical Republicans exactly what they are, which is radical. They're fascistic, they're white nationalists in many cases, and they're extremists in terms of their religious views. And they're imposing that on the rest of the country quite successfully in many states because you have a Republican trifecta and you have a lot of these grassroots or supposedly grassroots organizations that are very activated and very motivated at taking over the government, even from the lowest levels, which most people will consider the school board. And so the mainstream media they just have this need to make it seem like they are balanced, to make it seem like they're not being emotional in terms of how they're describing things. But sometimes you have to call a thing. And I can tell you that the Moms for Liberty are not joyful warriors. So
Yeah.
that is not calling a thing a thing. So they overcorrect when it comes to trying to not sound like they're too down on the Republicans.
So you mentioned like I guess you mentioned like the fact that a lot of media companies want to appeal to both sides of them and they want to appear neutral and they want to appeal to this kind of broader swath of people. And we see it particularly at a place like CNN, also with ABC and CBS doing what they just did. But does that actually break through or reach people? I mean, like I feel so much of cable news now is siloed and there is no such thing as reaching Republicans or reaching the type of independent voter that you're seeking, or is there still?
Well, I think what the problem is, and the reason why the media has like record low of trust is because there's a lack of credibility there.
Yeah.
People don't want you to piss on their leg and tell them that it's raining. And people recognize when things are not right. And what the media has not caught on is that even though we have, for instance, a divided Congress, we have divided government in many places, a lot of the Republican policies are incredibly unpopular. Yet the Republicans go forth and conquer anyway. And so I think what they take a look at how dysfunctional our government is, the way that it has been gerrymandered to make it more split down the middle. And they think of that as the country split down the middle. That's not the case when it comes to the actual issues. And so what they end up doing is they end up making people disillusioned and checked out and not seeking them for their primary source of news. That's why the ratings are down, not because they're too much on one side or the other of the extremes.
Yeah. And I mean, the ratings are down too, particularly because we both know, I mean, you study this really closely. I mean, young people just aren't consuming information from cable news or kind of traditional outlets. There's a lot of efforts by cable news companies, I think, to try to reach a younger audience. But I'm wondering or guys, what are the type of platforms that younger people are tuning into? And is there anything that these kind of more traditional legacy media types can do to pull in a younger audience, or have they kind of lost them for the foreseeable future?
Well, I think, a lot of young people are turning into social media, but a lot of young people turn to people that they trust. A lot of times they get their news from their friends, from their family members, or from trusted personalities. And so I think what the news has to recognize is that there is a role, obviously, for them to be neutral and to just point to the facts. But I think they're too interested in pulling from the same group of people to be the tastemakers, to be the politicos and the people who are commentating educating on what's actually happening. And when those people just don't resonate with younger folks, then the young people just don't check into that. And it's not just a young thing either. It's half of the country is disillusioned with the state of our government, because they just don't feel how it's working for them. They are not getting the news that is the good news, and they're being bombarded with all the bad news. So there's a widespread issue here that's not just relegated to younger people. But I don't know necessarily if there's a silver bullet, because I always say that credibility is a cumulative
Yeah,
effect. You don't just have one viral story, or you don't just have one thing that you strike gold with, and then your credibility is won. People have to continue to see you and seek you out to see what you have to say on things in order for you to be relevant.
absolutely. You mentioned the good news, and I wanted to get to that because it's something that I don't think cable news covers enough of, and particularly this one person who I know you cover a lot about, but doesn't really get a lot of attention from the mainstream media. And of course, she's Vice President Kamala Harris. Walk us through why why she's gotten such little coverage. Because I mean, the things that she's been doing are remarkable, but there seems to be this disconnect between what she does and the type of coverage and attention that she gets.
Yeah, there absolutely is a disconnect there. She's marginalized and erased, both of those at the same time.
Uh,
And I think a big part of that is because we don't really talk policies anymore. We don't really talk about results. We talk about what people think is happening. And when that's happening, then it becomes about perpetuating a narrative that she's not doing enough, perpetuating a narrative that she's unpopular, perpetuating all these narratives that are just not borne out by the facts. And so that's why we're not really seeing a lot of what she does, because people aren't as interested in the fact that, for instance, over 30 states have expanded postpartum Medicaid coverage for women and who've had childbirth, which is one of the leading issues that Vice President Kamala Harris has long championed, which is maternal mortality, and the fact that not just Black women, but women of all races in this country are more likely to die than any other developed nation as a result of a childbirth. And so those are the kinds of things that just don't get the kinds of clickbait. They're not sexy to the media consumers, to the political class. And let's just also be honest, Vice President Kamala Harris is a person who is much more into doing the work
yeah.
and letting the work speak for itself, as opposed to doing the schmoozing and the hobnobbing that some of the other politicos in Washington tend to enjoy much more than her.
Right.
Now, is that for the better? Maybe not, but that's one area I think where if she were a little more into the kind of shaking hands, kissing babies, and happy hours in DC, maybe she would get better coverage. But you can't beat actually having results in the
Yeah.
long run.
I mean, it's rare to have someone like Vice President Kamala Harris actually in DC and who isn't focused on that type of DC, but is focused on policy. But in that same vein, I mean, what should people who tune into cable news or who are kind of looking at the news now and don't really hear much about Vice President Harris know about her? And how do we elevate more of kind of her and what she represents?
Yeah, well, I mean, number one, we know that everything is algorithm based, right? Everything is about what you're interacting with in terms of social media. And companies are looking at as well. They're looking at the analytics. And so the number one thing I tell people, if they want to be an advocate for Vice President Kamala Harris, you don't have to go out there and make a video. You don't have to go out there and make original content. Interact with the content that is about her, that she's putting out, that other agencies are talking about her. Those are the kinds of things that get attention and will generate more positive coverage, or even just more accurate coverage. How about that?
Yeah.
But in terms of what she's doing, I think what is really important is to see that, and this is one thing that the Biden Harris administration is really good about, is seeing the through line to the kinds of policies that she's long advocated for the past several decades, and what actually ends up being, announced in the administration as well as in the legislative priorities for the Democrats. There are several examples of this. We could talk about the broadband conversation, which is a much bigger conversation now than it was when she was tasked with leading up getting broadband through the infrastructure package. Now they're making announcements about how the success about that. I already talked about maternal mortality. We can also talk about one thing that's particularly important for for the racial wealth gap for Black people is home ownership. And she's led a task force on closing the home ownership appraisal bias or tackling that. We talk about water infrastructure in this country. She led up lead pipes and eradicating those. And so there's an every aspect of the Biden Harris administration. You can see Vice President Kamala Harris's fingerprints, even if she doesn't get out there and wave the mission accomplished, that was all me banner.
Absolutely. The one other thing I want to ask you about before kind of we run out of time is the affirmative action case. I saw you talking about it with Roland Martin. What do you make of the Supreme Court's ruling? Because I think a lot of young people out there are really concerned about what their college experience will actually look like now that we can't build racially diverse classes or as well as it once was. How will this impact students of color and college admissions more broadly? What are your kind of reactions to what we saw last week from the Supreme Court?
Well, first of all, I want to say that we've never had a meritocracy in this country, point blank, period.
Yeah.
When you have certain barriers for certain demographics, historic, systemic barriers that are still existing today, that is not a meritocracy. And so the affirmative action case changes nothing in terms of whether or not people are going to be evaluated on their merit as opposed to what people perceive to be on their race. The reality is we are going to see less diverse spaces in many places. I think we're even seeing it now in terms of not just the statistics and emissions and a number of other things, but in the climate that we have in this country. We went from the racial reckoning of 2020 when the George Floyd and Breonna Taylor and Ahmaud Arbery cases were really galvanizing the nation to now in the past week, we saw 6 Black women who were in D&I positions in prominent organizations be cast aside. And so I think that you mentioned you're a UCLA person. I'm a UCLA person. Go Bruin. My class famously we staged protests back when I started at UCLA because my incoming class had 125 Black students that were not athletic students. And out of an incoming class of 3,000, those numbers are dismal. So there will be a tangible impact on it. However, I do think it's important that people understand is go where you're celebrated and not tolerated. There's still so much opportunity. And I think particularly the younger generation and, people across this country are realizing that there are multiple ways to success. And it's not just about, what the upper echelon call, what people deem the upper echelon. So yeah, don't let it get you down, but it does suck. I'm not even gonna lie about that.
Yeah. There was a great piece in the New York Times about how maybe this is a moment where we can rethink what it means to go to college for young people and to say, maybe the Harvards of the world, we don't have to focus on that. There are still plenty of other opportunities, but it still does really much throw a wrench, I think, in a lot of people's hopes and dreams that we live in some world where, maybe we can right the wrongs of the past. But it's unfortunate. And Reecie, thank you so much for all that you do to inform us, to keep us educated. You being in this media space as a Black woman, thank you for all that you do, and go Bruins. And it was so great chatting with you.
Thanks so much, Victor. Thanks for all that you do.
Of course. Thanks so much. Well, Reecie was so powerful. For those who don't know, we actually met for the first time when we were on this panel together for this Northwestern undergraduate class. And I remember hearing her speak about misinformation, disinformation, the media's role, kind of all of our roles in this media ecosystem. And I was really blown away. And I'm so glad that she was able to join us today to talk a little bit about this whole kind of media ecosystem, how we can push back against it, and just really showing us kind of what this kind of traditional media structures have been focused on. So thank you, Reecie, for joining me today. And for those of you who want to follow her work more closely, she is on Twitter at Reecie Colbert. She also hosts the Reecie Colbert Show on SiriusXM, which you can follow every day. She is an important and a really great voice for all of us. There's not much news of the day that I have to offer other than I hope you all had a great 4th of July. Yesterday, let me know what you did on 4th of July. Yesterday, I was at the White House. No, I was not the one who left the cocaine, although I've had many questions asking me about whether or not I was the one who left the cocaine. Although I wish, I did. I do not use cocaine, and I was never in the White House. But apparently someone did, and now it's been shown that just for all those Republicans who might be listening, no, it was not Hunter Biden. No, it was not Joe Biden. Joe Biden wasn't even there over the weekend. This was a visitor who went to the West Wing and who left cocaine in one of the mailboxes. I know it's unfortunate, but that is the kind of what happened. And now, of course, Fox News and Republicans are trying to frame this as, Hunter Biden and Joe Biden and Donald Trump tweeted about it recently, but there's no truth behind that whatsoever. But I was there yesterday. Great fireworks, great performance by Neo, who's a rapper. But let me know what you did. Send any pictures of fireworks that you have. I know the dogs yesterday probably were not very happy with that. They get really scared. But nonetheless, it was another 4th of July in America, which is interesting. I mean, it's interesting. It was interesting for me to see all of the Republican kind of statements about what freedom is, what patriotism is, when they are trying so hard to take it away from us. And I think it's up to all of us to really kind of pay attention to what they are doing, because none of us should stand for that. But that's all the news I have for you today. We will be back on Friday of this week with a very exciting guest who I'm sure all of you know. He recently signed a deal with MSNBC, and he is Brian Tyler Cohen. He will be joining me on Friday at 6 p.m. Eastern, 3 p.m. Pacific, right here on youtube.com/Politicon, or on my Twitter page at VictorShe2020. Again, Brian Tyler Cohen will be joining me. He is massive online. He's, I think, one of the most followed YouTubers in this kind of progressive space out there. He's going to be joining me in a conversation that will not disappoint. So join us on Friday for that episode at 6 p.m. Eastern, 3 p.m. Pacific, right here on youtube.com/Politicon, or on my Twitter page. You can like and subscribe so you don't miss it on Friday and you don't miss an episode going forward. Thank you all for watching, and I will see you all on Friday, and have a great rest of your Wednesday.